Oh, hi there. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on what part of the country you are calling in from. I'm going to take a couple of minutes here and let everyone into our meeting. And I want to remind everyone to please mute. And if I mute Matt and I end up muting you, just unmute yourself so you can talk as well.
I will unmute myself as I see fit.
Okay, perfect. And while everyone's getting in, I'm actually going to let you know we are recording this. I'm going to send a copy of the recording, and then I'm going to send a copy of the slide deck we're going to go through. And then we also have a really great handout, which is a workbook. And so I'm going to send copies of those out tomorrow as well. But I'm also putting them into the chat. And so while we're getting started here, I'm seeing some of you are putting into the chat right now. I love all the AI note takers.
Yeah.
That's very, very helpful. So while we're getting started, if you do have questions as you go along today, just because of time, if you can just do me a favor and just pop them into the chat, we'll take a look at what those questions are. And then also just some feedback. This is the first leadership webinar we're doing. Matt and I collectively with several other industry leaders co-authored a book last year that was titled Leadership Matters. And one of the things I think, Matt, we found in that book is really what a need there is for leadership training, mentoring, conversations, networking, all those kind of things within our industry. So if you are, finding this to be very helpful and would like to see more on this conversation, let us know. At the beginning of this year, Matt and I did a series, I think it was 7 months long. Is that right, Matt, what we did?
Yep, we gave birth to a series on non-delegated lending and marketing.
Yeah, and it was really about creating your plan, your business.
Yeah.
And so, and again, I'm going to remind everyone to please.
First and foremost, thank you for reaching. Thank you for.
I think that's Michael Harris I'm seeing there. So just a reminder to mute yourself. So if you find what we're going through today as far as a good, like, okay, guys, that's like a 30,000 foot view. We want to get more into like a 10,000 and some of the planning and what we need to do as we're going through this conversation. By all means, let us know.
Yeah,
Okay.
it was a great series. So yeah, I think it would probably be beneficial. I think everyone kind of takes the beginning part of the year to reanalyze what they're trying to do, so we can run it back and try to make it even better as we go forward.
Yeah, and then bring some of the other things in. And then also, just by show of hands, Matt and I were just when we were getting, ready to get started with this, talking about we've got some great conferences coming up. NAM National is happening in Vegas. That's starting on Friday, and then followed by MBA also in Vegas. So I think this is like the first time that we've seen MBA and NAM both in the same city back to back. And then of course AIM after. It's AIM. It's in Nashville. Is that right?
Yes, in Nashville.
And then type in the chat. How many of you are going to be there? If you're going to be at NAM National, if you're going to be at AIM, let us know. I know FirstFunding will have a booth there. If you're going to NAM National, Matt and I are doing a session on Sunday, 10 a.m. in the main Augusta Ballroom on becoming a non-delegated lender. So if that's something that you're interested in being a part of, Joe, you're going to be at MBA. Awesome. Let Matt know. I know Matt's going to be there. Nate's going to be there. Everyone's going to be there. So by all means, would love to see everyone. Okay, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'll probably be letting a few people in as we go along here. But our conversation today is about leadership. And really, it's about leadership in action. So, creating what you need to do in terms of an action plan for leadership. And it begins with really building that influence within your organization. And I titled this, Matt, From the Inside Out. And that begins with really looking at what is leadership. I love this quote from John Maxwell. He is actually the person I go to as far as any conversations I'm looking at for leadership. Just the guru of it. But I love this quote: "Everything rises and falls on leadership," and that's very, very true. So on our roadmap today, what we're going to do is talk about 4 areas. And Matt, I know you know these areas very well. The first area is to lead with influence, not authority. And then the second area we're going to talk about is coaching versus managing and what that looks like. The third area is identity-based habits and what that looks like in particular, not just for ourselves, but also for our teams. And the fourth is then, how do you create that tactical action? So how do you put this in place to create a plan in order to make it work? Now, this is a webinar. Obviously, we're going to be going through a lot of information. I like having follow-ups, Matt. I like having, it's like, okay, this is a great starter, Ginger, but where can we go from there? So I tied books to each of these areas. So if you say, hey, this is the area I want to work on, for this month, this is a great book for you to tie into that. I had the opportunity to be a corporate trainer for Dale Carnegie Training very early on in my career. And this is the book I give to everyone who graduates, whether it's from college or it's from high school, whatever. This is the book they get. If you haven't read it, read it. If your team hasn't read it, get it. I would strongly encourage that. And then the second one for coaching versus managing, as I shared, John Maxwell, guru as far as leadership. I love this book that he has. It's the 5 Levels of Leadership. So that's a great follow-up book on leadership. And then getting into your identity-based habits. If you haven't read Atomic Habits by James Clear, it's a great read. If it's been a while since you've read it, go back and reread it. I often do that. Matt, I know you do that as well on books where you go back and reread. And then talking about tactical action planning. And this is a book, I'm about halfway through it. I love it. I actually got the workbook that goes along with it, which Dan Sullivan didn't write, but you can find one on Amazon. And it's called 10 Times is Easier Than 2 Times. So 4 books that you can tie into these areas that we're going to get into.
Yeah, it's Ginger. So it's a perfect timing for me right now because I'm going through this change in my coaching and my managing and what I'm trying to do, because now that we're in this mode of AI, I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit about that as we go forward, right? Like the managing is changing a little bit from my seat just because they have the information at their fingertips to be able to get the answers that they need, but it's the critical thinking piece of it that I'm just trying to make sure that they're taking advantage of as well. So it's a really good time for, I'm never static as a leader, right? I'm always trying to figure out what's the next best, next best thing and how to adapt to the new work world. And so I'm kind of going through that phase right now as we just launched, an enterprise version of ChatGPT over here. And I'm trying to figure out, okay, well, I don't want my team to rely on it for all the information that they did. It's a tool. And so I'm just trying to figure out how to implement it all. So it's a really good time to have this conversation.
Well, and interestingly enough, Matt, a very good tie-in to this quote by Dale Carnegie, because this quote says, when dealing with people, remember, you're not dealing with creatures of logic, but creatures of emotion. And so when you're bringing in that element of AI, that you need that logical side of it, but yet people are looking at it emotionally. So how do you blend the two of those together?
Yeah. And I shared with you, Ginger, before, it's no secret that I was a terrible leader when I first got into a leadership position. I was awful. And I self-proclaimed terrible manager for the first 3 or 4 years of my career, where I just said, just do what I do. Look how easy it is. This is what I do, right? And I had success. And the leadership that has been brought to my feet over the last couple of years through books and reading and practice It's all about working with people of different emotional rankings, I guess is the lack of a better term, to say, okay, I need to customize my message to a lot of different people.
Exactly. And so, and man, I can never see you as a horrible leader.
No, I
Um,
would.
but and you know, to go back, and you and I knew each other years ago when you first got into a management role, but you were very smart because I remember a conversation that you and I had, and you said, "What should I do?" And so I encouraged you to take the Dale Carnegie Leadership Training for Managers course, which I love teaching that course. You were in LA, so you took it in LA. And then you also did the MBA, the Future Leaders course
Future
there
Leader
as
Program.
well.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
and yeah, no, I appreciate that. I definitely worked towards getting better. And quite honestly, it's funny. As we're kicking this off, I just go, you know what? There are days today when I'm not a good leader. I'm just cranky, and I got work to do, and I got 10,000 people coming at me. And you just try to center yourself. And so I know everyone on this call probably deals with the same thing, right? There are days where I don't want to be a leader, right? I want people to come to me and tell me like, hey, this is what I can do for you. I don't want to have to provide all the solutions for everybody. And so it's all about just having a path forward and some things that you can just kind of call on when you need to be centered.
Absolutely. So you mentioned this as far as, you know, becoming that first time manager and just saying, hey, just do what I do, you know, follow me. And that happens so much in our industry, right? You know, and authority is given, influence is earned. And I'm sure you saw as soon as you made that shift and going from, you know, I have the title, just do this, just do what I'm doing. And you shifted over to where you were, you know, working more on having that influence and listening more and in doing that. You saw that change, right? Because when that happens, influence creates commitment. And so people will go above and beyond, not because they have to, but because they want to, right?
I think that probably the number one thing that I've gotten into talking about the influence is I ask now for permission to give feedback to a lot of times. Like when I'm in my one-on-ones and I say, what's going on in your world? What's happening? And there's a lot of verbal, just like dumping, like the problems just kind of dump out, right? Whenever you ask someone what's going on in their work role. And I kind of write them down and I say, is it okay with you if I give some feedback, right? Or is it okay if I have some suggestions, right? And that has really been beneficial to me because no one's going to say, no, I don't want feedback. I don't want suggestions, right? That's the one thing. So
They may, but that just is a, you know, maybe a different time. You
well,
know?
yeah, that's usually saved for my wife when I ask. I'm like,
Okay, that's different.
I always say in my marriage, I'm like, do you want manager Matt or do you want husband Matt? And when you get the yes that says yes, I do want feedback, and then you can follow up with that. Is like, okay, well now that we've shared the feedback, how are we going to hold each other accountable for what we're trying to do? And that talks about the commitment, right? Asking for that commitment on a forward.
Exactly. Yeah, and again, Dale Carnegie taught that people will join you emotionally before they follow you logically. So again, that disconnect between logic and emotion. And so when you're looking at creating this influence rather than authority, it begins with people feeling seen and appreciated. So the fact that you just led in with that, you know, you would ask, hey, what's going on? If it's a problem, we're going to talk a little bit about that. You know, influence, it doesn't start with logic. It doesn't start with data. It starts with the connection. And so if you lead with that appreciation, with that sharing, with that connection, people will follow you with that trust. So what you're doing, Matt, by asking, may I give you feedback? You're creating that trust. You're creating that safe space. And there's actually neuroscience that is behind this. It reveals that this influence activates an actual different neural pathways than authority. And when people feel genuinely influenced rather than commanded, then their brain engages in the frontal the prefrontal cortex. And that's the center of creative thinking. That's the center of problem solving. And so when you have this neurological shift, then it leads to an increased intrinsic motivation. And so people have better retention of learning. They have higher levels of engagement. They literally think better when they feel influenced rather than controlled. And there's some numbers that really speak to that as well. So, you look at these, Matt, 73% higher engagement, 2.3 times innovation increase, 40%, 47% retention improvement. So we're not just talking about having, a better team. We're talking about creating and keeping a better team, right?
Yeah, I mean, oftentimes one of the things that ends up happening in a leadership position is you get people that come to you and say, hey, we have this problem or we have this challenge, whatever it might be. What should we do? Right. And I deal with that quite a bit. And quite honestly, there are times where I go, damn, I don't what do we do? Right. I don't have all the answers to everything. And so I really do enjoy that part of the leadership where I go, when I talk to people I've never encountered this challenge. Like, let's brainstorm these suggestions. And when you start doing that and then you start engaging them and be like, oh my God, that's a really good idea. Let's flush that out a little bit more. Let's talk a little bit more about it. That really has driven team results for how my sales team today tackles problems. And in a sales role, I don't know what our audience is today with regards to how many people are in sales role, but in a sales role, oftentimes salespeople feel like the problem that's on their desk doesn't exist in anyone else's desk in the world, right?
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
And so they work in this silo of I have a problem, I need to solve it or whatever it might be. But like I've seen really great opportunity when my sales team brings me a new challenge that neither one of us has ever seen. I bring in the entire sales team and say, let's talk this out. Let's talk this through. My voice can't be the only voice in the room with a reasonable response on how to handle this. And it's been really powerful to see that go forward. And, talking about the power of conversation and the way that it brings the sales team together to influence them to try to, now sometimes they're having these meetings without me. They don't need me in order to, right? They don't need me to get on the phone with their teammates to find a solution.
That's perfect. And that's what true leadership is about. We're going to get into that as far as creating other leaders. But 3 keys to building influence. The first thing is to connect them to the bigger picture, which is what you were talking about. So not just hitting the numbers, hey, we need to close 50 million this quarter, but have it relate to what that means. So every loan we close is another family moving into a home, another retiree securing financial freedom, another non-delegated lender, growing their business, becoming, part of what they want in their community. Because if you think about the numbers, that'll motivate short term, but the purpose inspires for that long term. The second thing is lead by example. People watch what you do more than what you say. So if you are, commanding this urgency, but you're missing deadlines yourself, then that authority collapses. That influence is gone. But if you roll up your shirt sleeves and it's crunch time and you get in there, then you earn that credibility. And then the third thing is trust through consistency. So the influence comes from, it doesn't come from just that one big, hey, this is what we're going to do. The halftime, we're down, we got to get in there. But it's those little consistent actions. That's what creates that consistency. And so when you do what you say you're going to do, and you recognize people fairly, when you have those conversations like what you're having, Matt, when you show up when it's inconvenient, that's how that influence compounds. So it's not just created, but it becomes more. And so here's my influence challenge starting tomorrow for all of you. And type into the chat. Let me know how many of you do manage people besides yourself. Because we can be leaders even if we're not managing people, Matt. Whether you're leading as far as realtors, obviously you're leaders in your community, all those kind of things. But here's the challenge. And this is for week 1. Listen first. Matt talked about this. Schedule those one-on-one conversations with each of your team member. Ask about their goals, their challenges, what motivates them most. Week 2, connect with purpose. So help each person identify how their role contributes to your broader success when you're within your organization. And so making that connection very explicit, making that connection very definite and meaningful. And then week 3, getting into those empowered decisions. So what are 3 decisions that you usually make that you can transfer the ownership to a team member and provide that support, not direction? And I think, Matt, probably you saw when you started doing some of these things for you as a leader, that started changing, right?
Well, the one-on-ones early in my career, I was notorious for rescheduling one-on-ones, right? Because it got busy or something, just middle of the day, you get sidetracked, your inbox is behind. I make it's a hard and fast rule. I do not reschedule my one-on-ones. It's super disrespectful to people's calendar, first of all, to do that. And it shows that their time is not as valuable as yours. So I really make it a practice not to schedule one-on-ones. Obviously, I try to book it around travel or when I know I'm going to be in the office and at my home office so I can be comfortable in my situation. And I have an agenda beforehand and I have follow-up afterwards. All those things are very important, but I'll tell you the number one thing that I started doing in the last 2 years that has made a major difference in my one-on-ones, first 10 minutes or 5 minutes, however much they need, is there anything on your desk that needs immediate attention right now? Right? If I don't kick it off with that, if I don't kick it off with that question, in the back of their mind, they're thinking about something and it always came up at the end of the conversation, which means that they weren't super focused on what we were talking about business-wise. So very important, very big shift for me in my one-on-one practice is get it out of the way early. Is there something that you need to talk to me about immediately that needs immediate attention? Once you get through it, all right, are we all set to jump into the agenda of the one-on-one? That's been a big win for me.
I love that. Great advice. So change. I know that's been a topic that a lot of people are wanting speakers on. I'm seeing that. It's like, how do you manage through change? We have so much change within our industry. I think we're probably change experts, whether it's technology, regulations, rates, programs, consumers, all of those things. Our people are changing. AI is obviously. And in the middle of all of this, people are looking, for what are you doing to influence this change? They don't want more authority. They want the influence. And so if we don't create that culture of leadership, well, our organizations can look something like this.
Whoa, that's not good.
Oh, I don't need this. I'm already late.
Somebody will come. Anybody out there?
Do you have a phone?
No. Sorry. Somebody! Hello? There are 2 people stuck on an escalator and we need help. Now, would somebody please do something? I don't believe this. You gotta be kidding me.
I'm gonna cry.
Well, there's not enough left to do, is there?
Okay, so you see what happened there. 2 perfectly capable people, they're stuck on an elevator, and instead of just walking up, they froze. And they waited for what? For someone else to fix it. And that's what happens in organizations without a culture of leadership. People get stuck. Now, that's an extreme visual, right? But that's what happens when they wait for a manager, when they wait for compliance, when they wait for someone else to take action, and the whole organization stalls. And most companies, when you're thinking about how they respond to change, It's with compliance training, with systems training, sales training. And those are all important, but none of them really address the real gap. Because the truth is, people, they don't leave because of compliance systems. They don't leave companies because of culture. It's the culture of leadership. And so, it's creating that. And so when you're going through change and you don't have that culture of leadership, it feels like chaos. People don't know what to do. It's like, what do I do? It's like being stuck on the escalator, waiting for someone else to make the first move. And so the good news is, just like with those escalator steps, the solution isn't complicated. We just have to decide to step up. And what that means is to create and to keep a culture of leadership. And so when you do that within your organization, then the people thrive. It's where trust replaces fear. So people can feel comfortable taking that first step, making that change, knowing that even if it is a mistake, it's going to be okay. They're going to have that support. And so the influence replaces the authority, and leaders are grown at every level, which leads us to the book that I recommended, which was John Maxwell's The 5 Levels of Leadership. So going through these real quick, Matt, level 1 is a position. So people follow you because they have to. That's where you started. That's where a lot of people start, right? It's like because you have the position. Level 2 is permission. People follow you because they want to follow you. You've given them that permission, that trust. Level 3 gets into production. People follow you because of what you've done. You've been good at what you've done. Matt, you talked about that. You probably had a level 3 level of leadership with a lot of your team because you had earned that through your production, right? They followed you because of what you had done. Level 4 is people development. So that's when you're able to develop those people, and people follow you because of what you've done for them. So what you've created for them. And the pinnacle is level 5, which is people follow you because of who you are and what you represent. So I'm not going to get into all these different levels, but I would really encourage you, if you're on a leadership journey, this is a great book to get into. And the thing that you'll find, Matt, is you may be at different levels with different people within your organization, and that's okay. But identifying that is important.
1,000%. I have, my rose-colored glasses, I feel like I have the same, I feel like I'm the same person to a lot of my salespeople, but I can assure you that I am level 1 with one person, and I haven't won the trust yet to move them into a different position. And young person, I'm just trying to figure out what they need from me, and I'm gonna win. I'm going to get this win, right?
Right.
And I want them to see that that the decisions that they've made, and I'm continuing to, with that particular person, I use the word empower a lot, right? I say, hey, I'm empowering you to bring me solutions, right? Don't come to me. You don't need to come to me for all the solutions. If you want to bring to me 3 different solutions that you think would work, I'll give you feedback, but I'm going to empower you to create your own decisions. And so I'm really trying to get to a different level with this one particular person that comes to mind.
Yeah, and that's part of it, which brings us to our next, which is managing versus coaching. So when you think about that, managing and coaching, they're not the same thing. And what you're talking about is that's coaching. And so managers add value to the process, but coaches multiply value through their people. And the best leaders, they don't manage, they coach. So just like what you're talking about, giving that, hey, come to me with 3 ideas, I can give you some feedback on them, and then we'll talk about what those best solutions are. Unfortunately, most of us especially within our industry, we just default to that managing. And so, it's faster. Sometimes it's just like easier, right? We're under pressure ourselves. It's like, hey, this is what I need you to do. Go do it. It's faster. It's easier. And we know we can get it done. Most of us are promoted. If you're a business owner, maybe you've started a business because of your past and what you've done as well. If you're, started your own, if you're non-delegated, and I know we have a lot of non-delegated lenders on here, you've started your own company. So it was because of what you've done, your production, you've been successful. And it's not necessarily because of people development that you have been promoted into this leadership role. So here's the danger. If you only manage, your people will depend on you for everything. And I've seen this. I was coaching a branch manager and, he thought he was doing the right thing. He would solve every problem for anyone on his team, and they'd bring him a problem. It's like, okay, this is what we're going to do. And then it's like, hey, we're having a problem, with this particular underwriters. Okay, here's what we're going to do. Every single problem they brought to him, he just took care of it. And so his people loved him because he always had the answer. They didn't have to think, they didn't have to do anything, but they also became what? They became dependent. And over time, what happened is he burnt out. And that's the trap of management. It feels helpful, but it creates this dependency. And when you change that and you start coaching, just like what you're talking about, Matt, what you do with your team, then you stop giving answers and you start asking, what do you think? I love that you say, bring me 3 options, right?
In all fairness, Ginger, it doesn't happen all the time, right? Not all the times am I a great coach versus this is management right here. This gray hair, this is the management side of me, right? And you hit the nail on the head. Sometimes it is easier just for me to handle it and get it done rather than try to coach to it. And I am very guilty of that all the time. And so this comes to a lot of what we've been talking about today. Like you're not going to be a perfect coach or manager or anything all day, 24/7. And so you just got to take stock of, all right, I got to make some time for me to be able to do this. And there are days where I do not have time to coach.
Right.
And it's okay. That's fine. But I can't let it be my everyday. And I'm just, hopefully that someone, if anyone has a takeaway, at the end of the day, you can't be a perfect coach / leader every single day. Sometimes you do have to manage just to get it done, but it's all right. Take stock of it, understand it as part of the process, and come back to it and try to do better the next day.
Right. And that's it. Coaching doesn't just solve problems. When you start coaching as a leader, you build problem solvers. So just like that example I showed you of people it's like, how do I get off an escalator that stopped? It's like when you build problem solvers within your organization, they'll think through that problem.
Yep.
And we'll solve it. And your hope is that they solve it without you being involved in it, right? And it may be right, it may be wrong, but then the difference is it's like, even if it's wrong, then you need to go into coaching and you need to coach through that. And you need to let them know it's okay to make those mistakes. That's a lesson I learned early on in my career. I had a great leader who I'd made a big mistake. I was a recruiter. I'd made a big mistake, went to her terrified that she was going to fire me or something for this mistake I made. And after I shared with her what I had done, she goes, okay, what'd you learn? And I told her, and she goes, great. I want you taking chances. I want you making mistakes. Because if you're not making mistakes, you're not taking enough chances. So now go do it again. And that's it. So you have to, as a coach, say it's okay for them when they make those decisions, that if it wasn't the right decision, again, you coach through that, right? So what did you learn? What are you going to do next time? So, developing, because when you start developing, then coaches multiply. So you're going to multiply other leaders. And you've seen that. I mean, you've already seen that often in your organization, right?
I've seen it in my marriage.
Okay, you only have one wife, so.
I've seen it in my marriage where my wife says, well, what did you learn from the lesson there? What did you learn from the action that you took? And I am very real with her and I say, I learned a lot. But no, this is perfect. And I mean, in our business, I mean, I make a ton of mistakes on a regular basis, right? And I'm always going to my leadership. And I think sometimes the idea is, I have a really young sales team. My young sales team thinks that it's, everything's going to break if they make an error. And I try to be vulnerable. I try to be vulnerable with them in front of my manager when we're all together so that they can see that I make mistakes and I have to go up one level too, right? And that kind of breaks down the walls of like, oh, Matt makes a mistake, it's all good. So, that really helps us out as well.
Yeah. And we have a question actually from an attendee. It says, what ideas or techniques would you recommend to separate your irritation or frustrations with the team member and still be professional and a leader to coach them? So maybe you have someone that needs more coaching. And I know we have an attendee on here. We were just having this conversation last night about someone who is kind of that, maybe on the fence a little bit. You're not sure about that. So what do you recommend for that, Matt?
Well, for me, I mean, what I try to do is I try to put myself in their shoes first. Like, was it bad? And this happens quite a bit in my world today, which is they just got misinformation from the beginning, right? So they're not being irritating or disrespectful or anything because they were just taught wrong, essentially, right? And so now I'm trying to recreate what they were process was, and I have a lot of patience for that side of it. And then also what I try to do is just take a step back and go, okay, well, what's the underlying issue? And quite honestly, there are times where I just had this happen last week, setting up some travel for somebody, and they were asking me 1,000 questions about travel. And it's just like, at some point, you're going to have to make a decision on your own. And so I just called her, picked up the phone and said, just take me through why you're not able to make this decision on your own, right? And I said it in a way where I just was kind of like making a joke about it. We talk about the leadership joke book that we wrote together, Ginger.
Yeah.
I lead with humor quite a bit because
Yep.
that kind of breaks the ice a lot. And quite honestly, like with a lot of times when people are irritating me, I'll pick up the phone and be like, "Come on, man, you're killing me over here." Right? What's going on your desk today that you're not focused on what we need to be doing, right? And you just kind of lead it with a little bit of a break in the ice. That seems to work for me.
Awesome. And so hopefully that helps. And and the other thing is sometimes your coaching is one of those things that it might not be a right fit. So if there's a lot of frustration, maybe things aren't following, that's a conversation you need to have yourself. So that's a whole different webinar.
Yeah.
But we'll close out just our conversation as coaching versus managing with John Maxwell. And I love this quote: people follow you because of who you are and what you represent. So when you represent being a good coach or being a good leader, then they will follow you.
Hold
Okay.
on. Before we move on from Cheryl's point, the other thing that I do is I also reach out to my leaders that are in my sales team or my organization. I say, hey, this was the message I thought I shared. Was it clear to you? Right? Because maybe they just kind of know what you're asking, right? And this happens quite a bit because sometimes you send out a directive that something needs to get done and it's not followed to a T and you get a little frustrated or irritated. So I have a couple of people on my sales team that I know are getting, they get it, what the ask is, but maybe they just get it because they've seen it before, right?
Yeah.
And so maybe my crafting of my directive might need to be a little bit better. And that being open to that critique is also very valuable.
Yeah, and listening. And that's part of being a good leader, is being able to see where you need that. We'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, so we've built influence. We've talked about shifting from managing to coaching. But here's the challenge. Leadership always gets crowded by the busyness that we have in our day. And you talked about this. Sometimes I don't have time to be a good coach. And so developing those habits is important. And I love this quote by James Clear: you don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the levels of your systems. So having those systems in place, creating those habits is important. And so, great book. If you haven't read it, Atomic Habits, this is one of the things that James talks about, is integrating the 4 laws of behavior change. And we're talking about not just change, but behavior change, your behavior change. Cheryl, maybe some of the things as far as behaviors need to be changed for your individual that you're talking about, right? And so in order for this to happen and create some of those leadership habits, you need to think about what are those behaviors that need to change. The first thing is you need to make it obvious. And so you need to schedule leadership time blocks for yourself. And it doesn't have to be a lot. I know, Matt, you like to do in 5 or 10 minute segments. That's a good amount that you can say, hey, I can do this. I can't do an hour today. So those are things to look about in order to make it a habit. The second is make it attractive. And so link things to things that you enjoy. So if you like going and getting a cup of coffee, spend those 5 minutes, go to a nice little coffee shop. And that way you're going to do it. You're going to enjoy it. You want to make it easy. And so if you need to do some systems, some dashboards, some templates in order to get your visuals and things like that, do that. And then finally, make it satisfying. So make it something that you are going to reward yourself. It can be little wins, even if you just get started on it slowly. I'm going to do 10 minutes a week. I'm going to, create some of those. Then you can do that. And here's an idea of what that looks like. And so, Matt, I broke this down into your personal growth habits and then your people growth habits for you as a leader and for you as your team. So we'll start with you as a leader. First and foremost, start before others wake. And I do this myself. I claim my first hour. I don't open my email. There's things that I work on. I'm doing a lot of leadership sessions in the next few weeks. And so I listen on YouTube to leadership, to other people speaking about leadership. That's for me. That's my time. And if the weather's nice, I live in Oregon, it's not always nice, I'll, go for a walk and I'll do that. So take that time and work on you. The second thing is learn something new daily. And so, that could be whether it's AI, whether it's reading, invest in yourself. You're worth it. And trust me, you will get re-energized when you start doing this. And then the third thing is, and you talk about this often today, Matt, as we were interweaving through your, journey of a leader, is being this radical self-awareness. And you just talked about that in the last couple slides that we talked about. Hey, how did that come off to you? And so end each day with honest reflection. What went well? What didn't go well? How did your actions impact others? And then start with the truth. And so when you start doing that and looking, then you're going to grow as a leader, right? And I know, Matt, you probably implemented a lot of these things without even knowing it.
Well, I do. The learn something new daily is an interesting one that you just talked about, which is I do read a lot about our industry, and I think one of the things that I have brought to the leadership side of things is taking in information about our industry, whatever's going on. There's always something changing in our industry, and then putting that back out to my sales team with regards to like, hey, I learned this today. This is something that's pretty powerful for our sales team. And that's gotten a lot of buy-in, right? Like, hey, nice. I took this in, I read this article. This is pretty impactful stuff. This is what I took away from this. Feel free to share it. I mean, that really has been brought a lot of camaraderie, togetherness amongst the team. And then, I don't know, the start before you wake, I roll out of bed and I look at my email in the first 5 seconds. So that's how I start.
And I mean, maybe it's at the end of the day you do that, something like that. Okay, the next thing is the growth habits for your team. So weekly one-on-ones. Set up those weekly one-on-ones. It can be a 5-minute. And I love, Matt, you talked about, hey, before we get started, is there anything that's on your mind? And it can be as simple as that. But people enjoy that. The second is give feedback in real time. So as you're recognizing things, whether it's good, bad, or otherwise, make sure and let them know. If there's something they need to do differently, make sure and let them know. When you do that, it becomes consistent. Then they're not, it's like when you call, it's like, hey, I need to talk about this. Then it's always like, oh, I know there's something up. What is it? But when it's consistent, both good and bad, then it's going to be well received. And then the third is create those stretch opportunities for your team. What are the next skills that they want to build? Help them to grow. And I think we miss that a lot and you talk about having a conversation with your team and we do annuals. It should be, maybe not once a month, but maybe every couple months checking in. Hey, what are some skills you want to develop? Where do you see you need to develop? Where are you seeing some holes that maybe we could, to help you out with this? And then the fourth is champion their wins publicly. And so, this is one of the things and I believe wholeheartedly in this, that you commend publicly, you reprimand privately. And so sharing those wins publicly is very important, right?
This is incredibly important. That number 4, while all of them do matter, number 4 is incredibly important to building a culture of success in your organization. In my world, we come together, we make decisions as a committee a lot, but no way does anyone walk into a call with one of my customers today where I do not publicly acknowledge that the AE is the one that got that win for them, right? And that has to be the way it is. You got to check the ego as a leader. Lesson learned from me, right? I mean, I was a top salesperson, so I had an ego, and you need to be able to let someone else get that highlight and take that win and run with it. You always, I'm very conscious of setting my salespeople up to take the win so that they get all the gratitude from the customer.
Yeah, that's so important as a leader, being able to do that and to give them that and to not take it and not to claim it. And nothing, I had a conversation with someone the other day who had their manager go on a sales call with them. And when they got the win, the manager was one that's like, yeah, I'm so glad I went with you. And I did this and I did that. And they're like, we did that. And so that's very, very important. And so creating that culture, and you talked about this, creating that culture of leadership, it's not just about creating it, it's about keeping it. And it reminds me of one of my absolute favorite Seinfeld scenes.
Can I help you? Name, please.
Seinfeld, you made a reservation for a mid-size, and she's a small. I'm kidding around, of course.
Yes. Okay, let's see here. Oh, I'm sorry, we have no midsize available at the moment.
I don't understand. I made a reservation. Do you have my reservation?
Yes, we do. Unfortunately, we ran out of cars.
But the reservation keeps the car here. That's why you have the reservation.
I know why we have reservations.
I don't think you do. If you did, I'd have a car. See, you know how to take the reservation, you just don't know how to hold the reservation. And that's really the most important part of the reservation, the holding. Anybody can just take them.
So, it's a classic Seinfeld, love Seinfeld, miss that. But anyway, what I loved about this is anybody can take the reservation. The important part is holding the reservation. And here's the leadership truth. Most organizations, they know how to take leadership, they know how to promote people, but very, very few organizations know how to hold on to that leadership, right? And so when you look at that, the function of leadership is to produce more leaders, not more followers. So the question is, number 1, are you leaving behind stronger leaders in your branches, in your organizations? And number 2, is your influence shaping the culture in any way that will outlast this cycle? So those are things you need to look at, right, Matt?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I don't know how I want to say this. Succession training, I think, is really lacking in our industry, right?
100% doesn't exist.
Right. And so are you leaving behind stronger leaders in your branches? Like, you really got to be looking at your team. This is probably a practice we should probably do for everyone, Ginger, as a takeaway for a follow-up training, which is, if you are in a leadership position, what happens if you're not here tomorrow? If that person disappears tomorrow, do you have people that can step up into that, right? You just want to make sure that you're well positioned for that.
Yeah, and honestly, Matt, for those in our audience who own their own business, that is a very real thing to look at, is that succession planning and what that looks like. And that comes to the 4th book, which is Dan Sullivan, and also Dr. Benjamin Hardy wrote it along with him. But it's the 10 times is easier than 2 times. And so when you think about this, a 2 times manager runs a tight ship. They're in control of everything. They have all those duties. They have all those things. A 10 times leader builds a fleet because they trust that other captains can steer it. And so in our organizations, this is, what we need to look at. And this is what I mean. It's like creating that when we have that management culture, which so many organizations have, we promote people into management roles. And we may send them to a training session. We give them a shiny new title, maybe a corner office, and that's the easy part. That's the taking part, right? But if we don't build the systems and the culture around leadership and building leaders in that succession, then we don't keep it. And so it's just like at the rental car counter. And I don't know if you've ever had that. I've actually had that happen where I've had a reservation and they don't have a car. So it's like, what do you mean? And within our organizations, we need to look at this too. We can't just say we value leadership, but when the employees show up and they're ready to grow, that's a whole lot of empty. So we have to create that. What does that growth look like? And when you create that and you have that succession and they're continually growing, you're creating the leaders, then you keep them. And so when you have an organization that just takes leadership, in the example that I gave with the video, it's like you have high turnover, you have burnout, you have frustration. And so it's important, to look at that. And so when you're creating a culture of leadership, it's not complicated, but it does have to be intentional. Just like keeping the reservation, you have to hold the leadership every day, every level, building on it. And so that's why building that culture of leadership within your organization is so important. In our industry, we have mortgage cycles, rates go up, rates go down, teams shrink, teams grow. But the leaders who stand out over the decades aren't the ones who only chase the productions. They're the ones who built the organizations that could thrive no matter the market. And that's what you want to get to. So here's 3 ways you can do this. And I'm going to get through this because I know we're running short on time. And so when you think about legacy leaders create depth. And so they multiply the leaders. And so creating other leaders within your organization. Legacy leaders, and when you're developing this legacy leadership, they create resilience. And so their teams can weather storms because the culture is stronger than what the conditions are. Legacy leaders create loyalty. So employees don't follow them because of bonuses, because of your tech stack or anything like that. They follow because they believe. And so what you want to do within your organization is looking at this. Who am I developing right now who could one day take my place? And you talked about that, right? And so does that exist within your organization? And this is one of those things that you have to look at this. And this can go part of those habits that you create. And Matt, I went through this last year. It's like, it's like if something happened to me, who would take my place? And what does that look like? And what does that mean? And so this is something, and this could maybe be one of the things that we could look into building onto that next year. So these are the things, as we're going through this, what are the additional items you want to work on within your organization? Because these are things that I think are great conversations to have, right?
Yeah, I think that this is this is very, very important in our business today because things do change quite a bit. And ultimately, there are a couple people I've identified on my team that I say, listen, I want you to have my job, right? One day I do want you to have my job. And so, and then I share with them the insight, the good, the bad, and the ugly of what having this job looks like. But I am also putting them in a position to be like, all right, when we bring in key decisions, right? Or when I have key meetings, they're part of that conversation. And now they're starting to take a little bit more of a lead, right? It used to be in this industry in my early 20s, a sink or swim industry. Mm-hmm. It really was, right? And I just think we did a really bad job of, a lot of organizations did a bad job of trying to promote leadership. And sink or swim does not work, right? You're never going to have a successful legacy if you just continue to have a sink or swim mentality. And quite honestly, what we're trying to build here is I have identified you. You were good enough to hire. You were good enough to promote. You were good enough to be a part of the team. Let's make sure that you're taking that next step and understand that there's bigger roles available for you.
Exactly. And how do you get ready for that? And so, look at the values that you have right now that are going to outlast you. And that's part of you and your culture. And so that's what you want to then take onto your team. And so what does that look like? And reinforcing those and building all those values into your hiring and your onboarding and your promotion decisions to where they're not just a part of your slogans, but it's part of the operational standards. And then, if you have managers within your organization, ask them to tell and to share. And so, looking at that is important. And then how do you want, and this is a personal thing, so how do you want people to describe your leadership when you're not in the room? And so this is something you can take away, you can work on, write down 3 words that you want associated with your leadership, audit yourself. What are the actions that are you doing that are aligned to those words? Seek feedback. You talked about that, Matt. Adjust your behavior until you have that alignment there. And so the legacy is, what story will they say in your retirement speech? It's like, what will that look like? And this is something that the leadership, you will see that you develop through your people, that how you develop them, how the culture, how it's reinforced, the way you consistently show up, all of those things. And so the question you have to ask yourself, and this is a very personal question, but is, what is the story they will tell when you're gone? And that's so important, Matt. I just had a conversation with a great leader in our industry. We know Jim Dunkerley, who was a founder of FirstFunding, and we talked about that. And he's been probably one of the most impactful people that I know in terms of leadership, legacy planning, all of those kind of things, right?
Yeah, I mean, Jim's a great leader, and I think he would probably even say here today he didn't know he was writing his legacy while he was writing his legacy, right? And it is a good practice for everyone on this call to start being a little reflective of the accolades and the wins that you've had along the way, so that you can pass along some of the lessons learned about those 2 people that are coming up in the industry, right? I mean, that's one of the things that that's one of the things I've been trying to focus on when I do some of my annual reviews with my sales team, is connecting them with where I was in their career when I was, their quote unquote age or at their progression level, whatever it might be, just because it goes like, listen, like, this is what the path looks like in the next 5, 10, 15. I'm blessed enough to have this career for 25 years now, right? So someone who's 5 years into their journey, they may not see year 25, right? And I'm trying to show them, like, this could be a great career for you. Look at X, Y, Z. And so I'm just trying to talk about that side of it as well.
Exactly. So I'm going to leave with this today, and it's having those leaders and those mentors to look to, and that's one of the things that I think it's important as we grow in our leadership roles, to find those leaders and to learn from them. I had a leader who I had an opportunity to co-produce a documentary, Folds of Honor, but it's Lieutenant Colonel Dan Rooney. And the story you're about to hear is from Lieutenant Colonel Dan Rooney. He's the founder of Folds of Honor. It's powerful, and I love sharing this story because I think it reminds us of the impact we can have and the difference we can make.
There's a term I love in life, synchronicity. I define that as chance with a purpose. And one fateful night, my life would change forever. I was flying from Chicago here to Grand Rapids, Michigan. It was United Flight 664. Finally get on this airplane, I walk through first class, and I see this kid. He catches me off guard because he's a corporal sitting in dress army greens. And I go sit in coach, and about an hour and a half or so later, we land in Grand Rapids, Michigan. As we pull up to the gate, the captain comes over, the PA, and says that we have an American hero on board. And my mind immediately jumps to this kid in first class, right? And it's like, what did he do? I'd just gotten back from my second tour of duty in Iraq, flying the F-16, and he continues, the captain, by informing us that we are carrying the remains of Corporal Brock Buckland on this flight. And his identical twin brother, Corporal Brad Buckland, was in first class and has brought him those 7,000 miles home. Captain makes another request that everybody stay in their seats until his remains are removed from the right cargo hold. And that night I watched The Other Side of War. As I looked out on the tarmac, the Bucklands on the darkest night of their lives. The thing that really got me, though, was his 4-year-old son. Sat right below the cargo ramp as that American flag draped coffin inched out. And the finality of the sacrifice hit me. The realities that this young boy would never play catch with his dad again. He would never be tucked in at night. And that term freedom isn't free didn't mean anything until I witnessed that. And as the ceremony finishes itself up, you know, I wipe away my tears, right, and I grab my backpack and I look back to the airplane only to see that more than half the plane had gotten off. No place to go, except that blanket of freedom we'll all sleep under each and every night, courtesy of 1% of this country that suits up every day, willing to defend and pay the ultimate sacrifice for the other 99%. And that was my moment of synchronicity. I knew with every fiber of my being that God had called me on a mission.
So Matt and I share that because, you know, Lieutenant Colonel Dan Rooney reminds us that leadership isn't reserved for position, for rank, for authority. Leadership is truly about influence. And here's, you know, what we talked about today, and I'll leave you with this. Influence is greater than authority. Titles don't inspire people, trust us. Coaching is greater than managing. So managers add, coaches multiply. Habits are greater than goals. And so you want to look at what you do as far as shaping those habits daily. Leadership is built on small, consistent habits that you do over time. And action is greater than intention. So knowledge without action just changes nothing. Leaders move ideas into execution. So think about that as you're developing as a leader, and to always remember leadership is about the difference you make. So I'm going to leave you. First of all, Matt, thank you for giving an opportunity to be able to share this information. If you are interested in the book, Leadership Matters, it's available on Amazon. Here's a list of the 4 books as far as follow-up. So if you're looking at, hey, I'm looking for my next book to read, these are 4 great books to start with. And then finally, and I'm going to send a copy of this, but I have a Leadership in Action workbook, and this might be something for us to get into. It goes through really a deeper dive into a lot of the things that we talked about today. So Matt, thank you so much. For those of you who attended, thank you so much. For those of you who are listening to the recording, make sure and let us know, reach out to Matt and his team, how you would like to see some additional information on leadership and growing.
Thank you, Ginger.
Hey, thank you, and I'll see you in Vegas.